Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. I was muted. Welcome to our Data Center Knowledge web seminar, Delivering Data Center Intelligence with Human-Centric Solutions, sponsored by Raritan. If you have any technical difficulties during today's session, please press the Help widget on your player console to receive assistance in solving common issues. If at any time you're having audio difficulties, like me, or issues with advancing of your slides, please hit your F5 key to refresh your webcast console. Today's web seminar is being recorded and will be available on demand for 12 months starting tomorrow. You'll receive an email when it is ready. Feel free to submit any questions you may have for our speakers in the Q&A widget on your screen. And with that, let's meet today's speakers. Our speakers today are Bill Clayman, Executive VP of Digital Solutions at Switch, and Calvin Nicholson, Senior Director of Product Management at Legrand/Raritan. And with that, take it away, Bill.
Thank you so much, Jen, the infamous mute button. Believe me, I think with everyone working from home right now, we've all experienced that. 15 minutes into a conversation, you're on mute. All good, Jen. Thank you for the introduction. Calvin, I'm excited for us to chat here in a little bit, but I've been doing a lot of research on Legrand and Raritan, and I'm familiar with you. And what I've noticed, Calvin, is that you've experienced some change and some growth. So before we even dive into this conversation, I feel it's important for you to sort of shift the paradigm even a little bit to help the audience know just how much change you've gone through and the kind of products that are under your belt. So Calvin, I'm going to go to the next slide and let you take the floor here for a bit.
That's perfect. Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much. So a lot of people aren't really familiar with the Legrand name within the data center space. And the impetus of the group is really to kind of grow with acquisition and to grow with top companies. So the latest acquisition within Legrand and put into the DPC group is the Universal Electric Starline busway, which I'm sure just a number of you are familiar with. They produce some incredible products. So with that acquisition by Legrand, there was some fundamental shifts recently changed to really put all the DC-centric companies within the DPC umbrella. So the top names in cabinets, of course, like the APCOs, the Electroracks. For the domestic brands, there's also some international cabinet companies as well as part of the Legrand brand. The Starline busway, which I've already mentioned, and a fabulous product, and we've worked with them for years and years, well before they were part of Legrand. And then, of course, now with the acquisition of ServerTech 2 or 3 years ago within Legrand, the largest PDU supplier in the world, combining the Raritan and ServerTech brands, and really two aggressive innovators, two companies that not only produce at a large scale a number of standard PDUs, but really as a core competency produce a lot of custom or unique PDUs because our customers are very specific and they want some unique solutions, and they certainly understand that those are tools that are part of the critical physical infrastructure. So you combine that with the structured cabling and the history there, and you really got kind of a little bit of soup to nuts for the white space there within the data center. I'm sure there'll be more acquisitions to come, but I appreciate that intro, Bill, and why don't we get to more fun and more interesting, broader topics dealing with the data center itself.
Thank you so much, Calvin. You know what? I bet everyone's got this 3-4 different browsers open now or tabs. They're researching all this fun stuff that are happening here. So great job. Thank you for the introduction. I do think it's important that we illustrate growth, and really kind of the overall topic around this conversation is growth, and a lot of that is happening with the intelligence in our data center. So we're going to have some things to cover. Calvin is going to be back very soon, so don't worry. We're going to have a fun conversation. And by the way, please, Calvin and I, we love an interactive audience. So if you have a question, comment, concern, anything at all around smart, intelligent data centers, what intelligent looks like today, or maybe if you've got an anecdote or a story, don't be shy. Please don't be shy. I can't see anybody. This is the best that we can do as far as conferences go right now. Hopefully one day we can do all of this stuff live and together. But this is a chance to network, ask a question. We will have time at the end to cover some some of the topics that might be a top of mind. But let's jump into this, right? We'll talk about the state of the data center, some findings from the latest reports that I had the honor of writing for AFCOM. We'll take a look at intelligence, what that looks like today, understanding, and I'm hoping that you're off your Google and your Amazon tabs right now. I'm back on here. The difference between future-proof and what I would call burden or burnout-proof data center technology. We'll cover that in a second. And then new tools, smart devices to light up intelligence inside of your infrastructure. We'll talk about some real-world use cases and where people are trying to employ this kind of stuff, whether it's at the edge, the core, or everywhere else to make their life a little bit easier. So let's kind of start. Obviously, we understand that these past few months have been extraordinary. And there's not a surprise that people say, congratulations, you've just achieved your 6-year IT plan in 6 months. But the acceleration of technology has not stopped. But there's been interesting things that have been happening. Innovation itself, this word, has taken on an entirely new meaning. It's no longer this cool, funky, crazy, awesome marketing word. It's literally about survival, transforming business processes and business models to survive, empowering workforces around efficiency and, again, innovation, making them be productive. And this is the big one, personalizing user and citizen experience, because every single one of you is experiencing something different, right? Working with different solutions, different technologies, making sure that you're continuing to be productive. So innovation, again, really means survival. And remarkably, folks still don't understand that whether it's a teleconference, collaboration tool, an email system, it lives in a data center, which is why so many organizations have looked at new technologies to invest in. This concept of people-centric. And after this webinar, I want people to really think about it. Everybody on this call, remember the word human-centric and people-centric, because that looks at greater levels of automation, right? Not replacing people, please understand that, but supplementing and augmenting their value and their skill sets. Multi-experience, which is working with cloud, multi-cloud, different kind of solutions, like that previous slide said, the personalization of your experience, human augmentation, again, leveraging the value of people and then augmenting their skill set with technologies, using things like edge, distributed computing, autonomous things, and so on. New kinds of solutions that we are all investing into, which really brings up to a big point. We are all, every single one of us, and I'll show you some data points to illustrate this, have become digital disruptors. Whether we like it or not, there's no more living under a rock. We are all using these tools and solutions to get ahead. So I want to share some of these findings from you. This is the State of Infrastructure 2020 update from the AFCOM State of the Data Center report. Just so you guys know, everybody on this call, we released this report in March, early March. Then everything happened. And we went back to the AFCOM team and said, listen, we need to update this. And so we released a new report, not the entire thing, but some updated key questions in late September with, let's call them mid-pandemic, whatever you want to call it, some dates, some info points and updates. There we go. So when it comes to being in the data center world, it's pretty clear that it's good to be in the data center business, and our ecosystem continues to grow, whether it's the number of data centers being built or renovated or constructed. All of those have jumped from the previous report to this report, and the biggest jump, people building 5 to 9 new locations, which includes things like edge computing. So we know that the amount of infrastructure is only going to continue to grow, and our requirements, the stuff we put in there, going to continue to grow as well. And that really is a resounding evidence when we come to look at network traffic increases, right? 70% of respondents to this updated report saw a network spike of 40%. Over a third reported an increase about 40% or more. So quite a few people saw that jump in network traffic. Now, when we take a look at the people working remotely, now I know I can't see, and I wish I could see everyone here raise their hands. A lot of folks are working remotely, and here's the potential. This is going to be possibly remote. If you take a look at Twitter or Facebook or Microsoft or REI, who just built this gorgeous new headquarters that I don't think anyone's ever going to step foot into, a lot of people are working from home, and a lot of people are continuing to use data center resources to be as productive as possible. So we're building this digital foundation, but most of all, we're absolutely doing this together. So I am about to bring Calvin back into this conversation, but it's important to note that all of this is a human-centric approach. Data, automation, intelligence in the data center, all of this really is no longer this word of replacing people. We're trying to build value and using intelligent tools to do this. When it comes to smart data centers, if you think this isn't being applied right now, in maybe your competitors, in enterprise data centers, in co-locations, hyperscale and exascale, the biggest cloud providers, you need to think ahead. Every single leader in the data center space is trying to look at efficiency, ways they can manage their architectures, and ways they can do this with data-driven solutions and intelligence. The latest report, I mean, please understand, this was sent out to thousands, tens of thousands of people, saw that data-driven solutions are very popular. Respondents are most likely to use data analytics, big data. 76% believe that new technologies like IoT and smart sensors are going to impact the data center, and 62% are currently leveraging data center automation and control. Are you guys, the folks on this call, are you using automation to some extent? Are you using data-driven solutions to gather intelligence and see patterns that potentially you maybe never able to see before? That's a really special conversation. It's important to get rid of that manual mechanical process and understand the tools that are out there to make your life easier. So much has changed in obviously so little time, just a few months, which unfortunately seems like a decade. But what does a smart data center look like today? I'm going to build this slide out because these are some of the things that I'm seeing, right? Data-driven intelligence, intelligent power distribution solutions, working with smart sensors, intelligent asset management, obviously integration with DSIM. These are just a small handful of lists that I see out there impacting what we do every single day. But boots on the ground, that's Calvin. He's the guy that's out there that's actually seeing some of this stuff. So let me ask you this first question. When we take a look at today's data center, Calvin, what do you think a smart data center looks like today?
That's a great, very interesting point, Bill. And you know what we're looking at is automation and monitoring, right, in the data center. We know is not something new, right? But the people that have done this are now a step ahead of the others because, especially in this new world we're living in, and I hate to use that term, it drives me crazy, but it is a paradigm shift, for lack of a better term. The people that have done automation, the people that have implemented sensors and remote monitoring and stuff, in some cases are really a step ahead. You know, people are not going to the facilities quite as much as they used to. And I think they're really relying on these tools. And then once you get past the fact that it does save you time, and you're getting the information, then really how do you use it? How do you add value? And there's been topics for many years, you know, the standard stuff of comatose, servers and power savings and stuff like that. But now it's really rippling through everything, right? As you implement these intelligent devices, they really only have value if they're set up and on the network and configured and you're getting that value back. So there's been a lot of automation tools with the DSIMs and other people. Some customers have done their own scripting or created their own tools, and then a lot of the manufacturers will use or provide open REST APIs and USB spreadsheet type tools and other things that you can just plug into a device and within 30 seconds to a minute automatically configure it. So things that you were looking at or thought about or seemed nice, I think now today are really critical in your day-to-day operations. So I think there's a huge shift there, in my opinion.
You know, that's a really good point. And believe it or not, it brings us to the next point. And by the way, thank you so much for some of the questions that are coming in. Austin, we're going to see if we can get to that. I might ask you to elaborate a little bit on that question. But by all means, everybody on this call, we are going to have a fun little interactive chat. So please do pop those questions in as they're coming in. So you brought up some really good points here. As far as automation, I really don't want people to get scared off by these technologies, which kind of brings us to this next point in understanding future-proof versus burnout-proof. Or again, I say burden-proof technologies. What's the difference, right? I'm a millennial, and I get really excited about technologies, and I love trying this stuff out. So at some recent conferences, I put on a pair of augmented reality, virtual reality glasses, and I was able to interact with entire racks and rows of servers, pulling stuff out, checking out where APCs were, UPS were, UPSs were, where network switches went, top of rack, the blade architecture. It was so cool. But then I realized it was kind of difficult to work with, that maybe it wasn't quite as baked as I wanted it to be. And I realized quickly that you shouldn't always chase that really amazing, shining, dangling carrot. Just because it's amazing technology does not mean it's going to make your life easier. So what I've noticed in the recent times when it comes to future-proof versus burden-proof is this human-centric approach, right, to technologies. And the question becomes, or the idea becomes, looking for technologies that augment, don't replace, real automation, smarter things like security, and where we can actually rely on technology. So I really want to ask this question from you, Calvin, as a person who's been deploying this. How do we overcome that scariness element? I don't know who else to say it, Calvin. Maybe you can help me out. But how do we overcome that future-proof, oh my God, this is so amazing, but it's probably going to make my environment more complicated, versus these are actual technologies that are not difficult to deploy and will help your environment out? Very long-winded question. The difference between future-proof versus burden-proof. Calvin, what do you think?
Well, and those are all great points that you've really made there, Bill. It's interesting because everybody, I think, is extremely busy, right? And they've got a lot to do, and a lot of this exciting stuff in some ways sounds like work. But with the tools today, I think a lot of that work can be used over and over again and really has great value. So with a little bit of an investment, and we have customers that will install a PDU as an example, or a smart rack controller, kind of a PDU without the outlets. It does door locks and sensors and other things. And they've done a little bit of scripting within their own facilities and understand how they're going to set up and how they're going to use the device. And they really can push a button and get that PDU on the network, or that device on the network. Mm-hmm. And it does sound a little challenging up front, but the amount of time that is saved in the long run is phenomenal. And more importantly, you're really getting the value from those intelligent sensors, from those PDUs that monitor power at the outlet or to the device level, or at the end feed, let's say for capacity planning, or identifying possible hotspots, or whatever you may be doing with the information. So it's not quite as scary as it seems, and the end game just has a ton of value. And again, the manufacturers offer some tools as well and can work with you and answer questions. And most manufacturers today, I think, are pretty cognizant that these things are going on, and as advancements are made or new firmware comes out or other things, they're really trying to be cognizant not to break or to change any of the initial parameters that customers may be using, because they understand that they will break that automation. And that automation can even go to the level of switch PDUs turning on and off devices, and the customers looking at those devices and knowing what that device is, and therefore automatically mapping, say, to what outlet on the PDU it's located at, as an example. So the cases have really been phenomenal of what customers have done. And once you get past the scary factor, as you mentioned, and you get past the fact that there is a little bit of work involved, the value is really phenomenal in cost savings and power savings, in uptime, really all the main factors, obviously, that our customers really care about.
So Calvin, I've got some good news. We are getting an interactive audience, and I applaud everyone who's sending me these questions as I'm looking them in. So Calvin, I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball, because there's a great question here, and Austin was kind enough to clarify what he was talking about. And by the way, Key and Vincent will get to your questions as well. And everybody listening, hey, keep popping those in. We will call them out as we see them, especially if they're good ones. It's so topical, this question, Calvin, that I want to make sure I ask this. Around the whole human-centric solutions, this architecture of designing for easier, the idea here, or the question at least, asset tracking within the data center by identification, traceability, and automation, and things like integration with DSIM technologies. We mentioned that a little bit earlier, but Calvin, can you talk about that a little bit as far as things like asset tracking, identification, automation, and furthermore, integration with DSIM solutions, and how all of that's becoming more seamless, especially within the distributed compute environment? What do you think?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It really is. First, I'll just talk to Heather about asset tracking because that's key. Customers have tens of millions of dollars, obviously, worth of devices. And they want to know where they're at, and they want to know that those devices are providing value. And there are a number of tools out there. Some of them are standalone solutions. Some of them are integrated to DSIM or other tools. We actually have an asset tracking solution that ties to a strip, not really a power strip, but a device that you put in the back of the cabinet, and you connect to that and identifies essentially the device by a unique identifier and the U location. So there's a lot of ways to do that, and unfortunately, it's one of those things where it's a priority when it's a priority, when you're doing an audit or something's missing or something like that, right? And then it becomes a whole new world when you're in certain industries, hospitals, and other things, which obviously are growing rapidly because you get into HIPAA and a bunch of other requirements and patient data and multi-million-dollar fines. So there are a lot of different camps, anywhere from RFID tags and other things. A lot of those are integrated in software tools. Some of those companies have their own software tools. Again, we have a methodology that we think works pretty well, but it is a very important thing. Secondly, on the DSIM and all that, if you look back to when a lot of this was falling out, it was funny because we kind of believed that the building management system might be the tool that kind of took over the world because it was already there, it was expensive, it was already monitoring things more, let's say, the back of the house than the front of the house. But then all of a sudden we had this evolution in DSIM. And that continues to evolve, right? At first, DSIM was going to take over the world, and then now you've got a ton of other tools that are either supplementing DSIM or people are looking at DSIM systems only for, say, powered environmentals, and then they're using other tools, everything from a Splunk to a ServiceNow type tool. It really depends on what your priority is, and I've integrated with hundreds of DSIM systems. Going back from scripting CLIs to SNMP now to more commonly open REST-based type APIs. My advice on the DSIM side is there's probably 7 to 9 things every DSIM will do. There's probably only 2 or 3 things that they do really, really well. And you need to figure out from that 7 to 9 things, the 2 or 3 things you really need or you really want to do well. And that's how you make your decision on what type of solution that you're going to implement.
So I think that's a really, really good approach. Everybody listening, data center infrastructure management has grown, evolved, matured, whatever you want to call it, extraordinary amounts. It's just come really, really, really big, or it's come a long way. I've led DSIM black belt classes through Data Center Knowledge and AppCom, and the kinds of things that we're seeing are extraordinary. And actually, this slide, let me push it to everybody so you can see, is one of the things that I talked about. Austin, your question around, inventory management, all this stuff, the reason some of these things don't work yet, like that picture in the middle where I was able to put on these virtual reality goggles and actually see an entire row within a data center, pull components in and out. Part of the reason why it's complicated is because of the uniqueness, the snowflake effect of the data center, because there's so many components. And just like you said, Calvin, there are so many parts and pieces that we have to be aware of. And that's really, really important, to sort of consider and take a look at as well. And now, sort of taking a look at some of these other technologies that are a part of this, security, smarter security is really, really important. Now, we've got a question here, and I know I'm sticking on this slide for a little bit longer than I want to, Calvin, because I think this is an important thing. But again, thank you everybody on this call, on this webinar, who's putting in those questions. You're doing a wonderful job keeping this conversation very, very fun. So if you have any more, please do pop those in. So here's the question, Calvin, and I'm really curious to get your perspective on this. Are data center IT security and physical security being phased into overall security, sort of this under one brand and architecture? And also, what are these common risks when you separate these things into silos? And Calvin, I want you to take this from an aperture of what you've been seeing, what you've been doing, the kinds of things that, you've been deploying, and how you've seen this Venn diagram of security sort of start to merge together a little bit. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, security has always been a huge topic, and especially today with all the vulnerabilities and things we're seeing. So in general, people talk about security, but what we're seeing a big push is on physical security, and frankly, that can be everything from different levels of access throughout the facility into the cage itself. A lot of customers today, even within the cabinet, are looking at kind of a two-factor authentication and those type of technologies, which I never really thought would ever come down to the person standing at the cabinet door, or even two different people needing approval or access to open the door. So physical security, I think, is being now delivered to the people that use it. It's kind of like, how can I put it? It's kind of like the guys running the infrastructure of the data center and monitoring at the RPT, but not sharing the overall cabinet power load with the IT guys. And so then therefore they have to go back and they have to monitor using a PDU or other devices to get that same information. So it's kind of done twice. So if you silo the information, it doesn't work for everybody. And so I think that's being opened up now. The second thing is that if you do have an instance, and I hate to again bring up this horrible COVID thing, when you start looking at cameras and other things that we can offer as part of a device that can be connected to a PDU, the camera can snap a picture, somebody opens the door. But nowadays, if somebody comes in your facility and maybe there is a COVID scare, you don't necessarily care which cabinet they're open, but boy, you're going to track them throughout the building with your cameras of where they went, because you really want to know that. So it's opened it up very broadly, and the right information has to be in the right people's hands to give a value and to maintain the level of security that you're interested in maintaining.
I'm sure you're not surprised by this, Calvin. Security is kind of a hot topic. And again, I appreciate everybody asking these questions that are coming in through the Q&A here. I'm really enjoying the conversation here, Calvin. And here's another one from Key here. One of the critical components is to be able to automate things within the data center. And this question specifically talks about the ability to, let's say, decommission or the decommissioning process around things like maybe storage devices, for example, either for security or for saving operational expenses. My personal experience is I think that this is a great way to do levels of automation. And in my experience in working with data center technology, just to answer the question, yes, there are ways to not just decommission disks and entire storage arrays, but actually have automated processes to do things like DoD wipes, 0 or 1 writes, make sure that technology or that storage drive is literally no longer accessible. But from an automation perspective, Calvin, can you talk a little bit about the decommissioning process of physical gear and how that can be potentially automated? And again, for security as well as OpEx savings.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because there has been a huge decommissioning. I go back to the servers because that's obviously one of the biggest problems. And you've got several things going on there, right? You've got energy efficiency. A lot of people now are using high efficiency or platinum type power supplies, and they want to make sure that the inefficient servers are really out of the data center. You've also got data centers operating at a little bit warmer temperatures to save money again for the cooling. If you look at the green grid and some of the server studies, the servers live almost as long, or in some cases, studies will say the same amount working in a hotter or a harder environment for those servers. But the fact that you are running and working them hard, it becomes much more critical to monitor, okay, when do these have to be cycled out? When am I going to do a refresh? How old are these units? You're right, is there destruction of certain parts of the servers? What can be recycled, right? Today's is huge in recycling, huge in packaging. We have a number of customers who want bulk pack and other things. They want to minimize that amount of waste, right? The same thing is true, I think, with decommissioning. So if you've got the right tools and you're tracking those assets and you can communicate and you know the operating environment and you know how old they are, I think it really is key then to be able to more easily make some of those decisions of what you're going to swap out and what you're going to decommission, and frankly, when you're going to do it, because you've got to plan for that from budget to resources all the way through the facility. Probably the biggest change we've seen there is data centers just really aren't spinning up their own cabinets anymore. There's a ton of integrators out there that are racking and stacking and then testing these things, and it's kind of become a plug-and-play world where 10 years ago you could go to a data center and they would brag that they just brought up 20 new cabinets this week or 5 a day or whatever. So there has been some changes there that makes this tracking control even more important.
I couldn't agree with you more. And everybody listening, please know that there's a lot of really great automated ways to decommission various parts of your data center. Do it in an automated fashion where it's single-click deprovisioning, and you can classify what you're deprovisioning, whether it's a drive or a server, like Calvin was mentioning, to make it as seamless as possible. And also there are technologies out there that do allow you to do things on compliance, like NIST or DoD standards. So again, something to be aware of as you sort of look into that automated process, especially when it comes to security. All right, let's move on here. Again, thank you so much for everybody contributing their questions. If you've got more, we will have some time here as we sort of push along. When we take a look at the makeup of the modern data center, right? We're popping the hood here a little bit, Calvin. And I know this image is a tiny bit blurry, but there's a couple of things in here that I want everyone to be aware of. The modern data center, especially from what I've seen, is a lot smarter. And you've got sensors that will range from temperature to rack inlet temperature and humidity to airflow to water leak sensors to contact closure, differential air pressure, and obviously even vibration, whether it's from a fan that's busted or unfortunately a seismic event. We know that there's tools out there to create intelligence in the data center, and it's really important to understand what people should look for. But Calvin, before you answer this question, I want to bring up this next point and this next slide. This is important. This is what a lot of people are facing today. Whether we talk about, we don't even, there's a lot of fatigue around this pandemic. There is, right? We're tired. We want to go outside. We want to enjoy ourselves. But that doesn't preclude the reality of the situation, right? Distributed IT, edge, cloud computing. These are the kinds of questions that I've been hearing. When are my batteries due? How do I know where my IT is being deployed? Right? Visibility into my regions, lacking technical expertise in certain regions. How do I reclaim some of this time? So my question becomes, when you take a look at the infrastructure that's out there today, how do you use this intelligence? What should people be looking for? Especially keep in mind that we've got things like edge computing, distributed IT, and this decentralization of technology. Calvin, what do you think?
Yeah, those are all fascinating points, and I think everything that like you said, people are really struggling with today, right, Bill? I mean, obviously the amount of data and how it's being used is really forcing a lot of edge or other edge type applications. Some of those applications are going to be very robust, I think, in data centers, and some of them may be in equipment closets or back rooms or other closets. So it really starts to have a dichotomy a little bit of the environment. And therefore, I think that if you look at things like sensors, not just a standard temp humidity, which is very common, like I mentioned earlier, obviously if you raise the temperature, it's that much more critical should you have a problem with your cooling system to know what the temperature is. But really adding intelligence, we're seeing high density applications where in some cases some form of liquid or water is being used for the cooling. And the water sensors today, if you get a rope water sensor and you buy the right one, it's smart enough to tell you basically where in the rope the leak was detected. And so there's a lot of innovation like that. Airflow differential pressure, obviously, depending on whether it's raised flow or not, is used or not used. But we're getting into a lot of other sensors that maybe because of the changing environments, maybe some kind of edge and where things are located, like air quality, looking at salts and corrosives in the air, or particle sensors, really things, like you mentioned vibration, which is a pretty new one that we're seeing requests for, even at some level, some proximity sensors. Sensors that you never really thought that you would ever get asked for, or customers would ever want. I think a lot of that is because of these changing edge type and other type environments where there is a need. The beautiful thing about it is that these sensors with the right infrastructure really just plug in to a device like an intelligent PDU, and other than maybe configuring some alerts, they really are kind of plug and play, and the base infrastructure is already there. So it's almost a gimme, and in fact, it's surprising that some customers implement this technology and even don't realize that they can go back and add sensors or contact closures for cabinet door locks or whatever it happens to be, to turn on a camera and take a picture of who just opened the cabinet door, whatever it is, that it's already there. They just got to do a little bit more work to really get a lot more functionality.
So I'm going to stay on this slide, Calvin, because our audience is doing a really good job at throwing us really fun curveball questions that are exceedingly relevant to what we're talking about, which means they're listening. Good job, audience. I'm going to ask you this. We've talked about distributed IT right now, edge computing, cloud. There's obviously a lot of different kinds of data center designs, and one of those is modular data centers, right, where you can have a portable method of deploying data center capacity. It can be placed anywhere where data center capacity is needed. These are purpose-engineered modules and components that offer scalable data center capacity with multiple power and cooling options, right? They can be moved, put in place, moved again, or semi-permanent, let's call them. Now, in my experience in working with these kinds of technologies, whether it's automation or DSIM or integration of various tools, right, as long as you have connectivity and visibility, it doesn't matter if it's modular, edge, whatever, you're still able to intelligently manage the ecosystem and update its location, whatever the case might be. But, for those that are listening and maybe, they're hearing, wait, modular, that's pretty cool, that we've never really known about that. What's your experience about that, or with that, Calvin, and maybe even looking at it from a perspective of everything we've talked about in terms of management?
Yeah, it's interesting because, it's kind of like what you mentioned with cloud a little bit, Bill. When cloud first really came online, I think that from a manufacturer's perspective, we thought, well, data center space is just data center space, isn't it? But now that we've got 4 or 5 very strong camps, I can tell you from dealing directly with a lot of those customers that they all have very, very different perspectives, some radically different as to how they're actually implementing and providing those types of cloud solutions. So the cookie cutter, where maybe the only difference is whether it's raised floor or not, and therefore maybe where the power and some other things come in or out, that's not really true anymore. So whether it's a modular approach, whether it is some variant of a open compute approach, whether it's even the amount and type of power, because maybe that power is or is not available. Seeing a lot of 400 volt applications today as an example. As the kW goes up, densities go up, but not as radical as you think. Densities are going up, but also they're going up in the number of devices as the devices get more power efficient. So there's really not one, I guess, shoe is all I'm saying that really fits all. You've got to have the options and the flexibility to work with these customers, find out what their goals are and what they're doing, and then go from there. And that's one of the reasons we do a ton of custom solutions. Some people value flexibility and are willing to pay for it. Mm-hmm. Some people, it's a very cookie cutter solution, and they're gonna over deploy, for lack of a better term, but they know they've got an advantage because they've reduced cost. Some are doing a lot of heavy monitoring and automation, but only in certain areas. So it's an interesting thing because people that don't visit a huge cross section of different data center customers would really be blown away to how different some of the philosophies are today, whether it's modular, like you said, whether it's AC versus DC power, whether it's mm-hmm. redundancy or not redundancy, whether it's where the UPS is actually located, whether they don't want to do power conversions, whether they're looking at 400 volt solutions to increase efficiency. It's amazing. It's really all over the board as customers really innovate in these areas for what best fits their model and what they're trying to accomplish.
You bring up so many wonderful points, and I'm glad the question about modular data centers came up. And I think I don't want to discount the question. I don't want to say it doesn't matter what kind of design you use. It certainly does for your application and use case, but it's the tools that you wrap around those designs. They're going to make it ultimately easier for you to manage them. I'm a fan of modular data centers or prefab even. I've learned a lot about them over my time in the data center industry, and I think there's great applications for them. My big thing for everybody is that there are tools out there right now that are making your life fundamentally easier, regardless of the kinds of data center technologies, architectures that you're trying to deploy. So that's a really good point there, Calvin. You have the freedom to choose your design based on what you require, but make sure you have the right tools in place to manage it, especially when you take a look at the world of distributed IT as a part of that decision-making process. We are going, I think this is the last slide here, remarkably. We are going to go into the Q&A portion of our discussion here. And I'm going to say again, thank you so much for everybody that has been that's been submitting their questions. It's very interactive. If there's any more, right now is the time to do it. We're going to have some time here to have this conversation and chat here. So let me kind of dive into one of the questions that's coming in here. And again, it focuses back on automation. We talk about it a lot, and honestly, in my experience, people aren't quite as automated as I make it sound. I think there's still room to grow. So my question to you, Calvin, as somebody who sees this sort of firsthand, what level of automation do you see, especially when it comes to setup and configuration for things like PDUs, sensors, or other critical physical infrastructure devices? How automated are we really, Calvin?
And that's a great point, Bill, because it really varies from little to no automation in possibly the setup or configuration to really completely automated. And in some cases, it can be the scale, right? Because if you're not doing hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of devices or cabinets, even, believe it or not, for some of our customers, it's kind of what you put into it is obviously what you get out. Or they may have chosen to integrate to a DSIM or another tool and do automation, obviously, kind of through those tools, right? And there are decent tools out there that will greatly assist in setup and configuration of a device like a PDU or a server. And then we're also seeing things that are really less proprietary, right? Early on, if you bought a certain server, maybe you were forced to use some tools that were ILO tools or draft tools or different setups tied to the different server manufacturers. Now we're seeing a lot of open protocols, a lot of open APIs. One of the biggest ones right now that's being discussed, and we're discussing a lot because I just came out with a portion that directly supports PDUs, are tools like Redfish. So there are a number of people that are looking at these tools and are implementing these tools. But again, it's kind of like your data center implementation and the type of implementation you're going to do. I think you have to intelligently pick where you're going to invest your time and money. But I do think that though you're right, some people are not very sophisticated. But like I said, a lot of the manufacturers offer some pretty sophisticated tools, and basically they're free or nominal compared to the cost of the devices, like on the PDU side. And like I said, we are getting more inquiries for tools like Redfish. So I think you're going to kind of see that to continue, and I think you're going to see it more of in an open source. Before a server could choose what they wanted to put out there in IPMI, because that was only the common tool, and the neat things you had to buy their tool or use their tool. Well, now as these open APIs comes out, most of the neat things are in the open API, and therefore essentially everybody has access to them. So you've got the information. Then your next decision is what level of automation do you want to do, or really how do you want to use that information?
That makes up a lot of sense here. And I get pinged on this, and it's kind of an extension of your answer there, Calvin, where we talk about these really cool solutions, these new kinds of designs and architectures. Here's what some of the leadership has told me, Calvin. We're worried that smart also means complicated, right? And we talked about this whole concept of burnout proof and burden proof. I kind of want to put this to rest as much as I can. What should leaders in this space be doing to ensure some of these new technologies maybe aren't a burden, or maybe you can say, hey, you know what, listen, they're not a burden sort of in general as long as you try them out and know what they can do. I want to make sure that folks aren't concerned or scared to try some of these technologies out where they feel that smart also means complicated, not necessarily easier. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's huge, and I think what a lot of our customers have really learned is though it may take a little bit longer to do their homework. So we see a lot of third-party testing. We see a lot of proof of concepts. We see a lot of evaluations, and then a back and forth with the vendor and direct interaction with the engineers and asking questions and, hey, I'm trying to do this, but I want to do it through, I don't know, LDAP, or I'm trying to do this or that. Well, have you thought about this? There's other ways to accomplish the same thing when they're looking at their automation. And in many cases, we have found, though, that it is certainly increasing the cycle. So it may take upwards of 6 months or a year to adopt some new technology. But if you do your homework and you understand how you want to use it and what you're getting and what it'll do for you, I think that fear goes away. I think the burnout factor at some level certainly goes away, and you understand how you're going to leverage that technology, what you're going to do with it, and really overall what tools you're going to use. So there's a lot of organizations that are investing in groups within their organization, both doing the automation and groups that are evaluating and looking at the products and understanding how that product may work with the automation group. We have a number of customers, for example, if we release a new firmware version, they want to review it first before they'll approve it or use it. Did it affect or break their automation? Do they feel it's secure? And, oh, by the way, there's this new feature that they love. How can they best leverage this new feature when they upgrade the firmware of that product? So it's rippling really all the way through industry. And if you're smart about it, you don't have to be afraid, and you can greatly, in my opinion, minimize that burnout factor.
So we're getting more questions in, and these questions are getting pretty interesting. So stick around. We got 10 more minutes here. Hopefully we can get through some of these. This next question, Celine, thank you so much. And actually, Francois, you asked the questions very similar. What are some examples of AI or machine learning even that data centers currently use, and what could be used in the near future, and what are some examples as well? As you think about this, Calvin, I'm gonna pontificate just a little bit, because I taught a decent black belt class, and this was unlike any other kind of class that I taught, because it was not focusing on what we used to have. It was what we have now and in the future. And in that class, I talked about how the coupling of AI, data-driven solutions with decent systems in the data center will have the biggest impact on the industry over the next couple of years. And what's really cool is that data centers are already well instrumented with sensors that provide a lot of real-time as well as historical data on IT performance and environmental factors. But it's the coupling of AI with decent that's going to make the biggest impact. As far as a real-world use case, I recall Google actually hit the headlines, one of the first ones, by implementing machine learning systems at scale. And their AI-driven data centers could realize massive energy efficiency benefits across their entire infrastructure. They called it DeepMind. Their DeepMind system was actually used to observe and recommend control tweaks to fans, ventilation, cooling equipment across all of Google's data centers. The algorithm that they used, the AI algorithm, provided several optimization recommendations that delivered, follow me on this, up to actually about 40% reduction in energy used by cooling systems. They then, don't let this scare you, a little bit later, Google turned over full control to a self-taught algorithm to autonomously adjust data center environmental controls, observe the results, learn, and get smarter. Yes, there are real-world applications out there, and there are some really cool systems and people doing this already. So, to your extent, there are numerous ways that you can integrate data-driven solutions into managing data center environments. So outside of that example, Calvin, what do you think? Do you have any other examples? Where does this play a role in, for example, data center management?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I am familiar with that Google example, and we know those guys quite well. And what was fascinating about it is I think, and I'm trying to think of the numbers off the top of my head, they listed the amount of money they were saving, and it was hundreds of thousands of dollars, I believe, at each installation. So it was unbelievable, actually, the value that it had. I think if you look at AI and those types of things, I mean, obviously the ones that everybody sees in the news and likes to talk about are the things like the self-driving cars, right? And apparently there's been self-driving trucks at some level for quite a while, whether people are willing to talk about it or not, because it's kind of scary because those trucks are huge. And you'd hate to be run over by one that maybe something happened. But I think it's everywhere. I remember years ago, I was a student in university, and we took a tour of a bunch of companies in Southern California, and we went to one of the big airplane manufacturers, and the guy was, since we're all engineers, the guy was taking us through really the nuts and bolts and the systems, and basically he looked at all of us and said, well, these things land and take off pretty much by themselves. And everybody kind of looked like, oh, okay, they do, right? So I think it's been out there for a long time, right? It's just what do you want to do with it, and really how are you going to use it? Because the value's there, right? And everybody kind of loves those little IBM commercials where they throw something out there and make you kind of think a little bit of ways that artificial intelligence and everything will be used. But I think for the data center side, what does it get back to, right? Well, it gets back to big data, right? And how you're going to manipulate and manage and control that big data and really be able to use it, right, and do it, obviously, in a cost-effective way to get the value from it, right? And that ripples through the core of all the data centers that are related to this. And then when you look at the amount of data, it obviously goes directly back to what you were talking about, Bill, with the edge stuff, right? Why edge? Well, there's a huge amount of data out there, and there's not a lot of value bringing it all the way back to a central data center, right? It's real-time data. It needs to be used quickly. In some cases, it's a ton of data. It needs to be discarded, and then you go on, right? So it's really reshaping, I think, what we're seeing in the data center market today.
Shaping the data center market today. I really like how you phrased that. And again, I just want to say thanks for all the wonderful questions that are coming in. There's still a couple coming in. We've got a couple minutes, by the way. So this is your chance to ask us, Calvin and myself, some more questions around anything that is smart data center, automation, AI data, all that fun stuff. I want to ask you a question, Calvin, around getting started. And this is something that came in a little bit earlier, but I'm also very curious about this as well. When we take a look at just simply getting started, right? A lot of the folks on this call have data centers, have data center infrastructures, right? Maybe they're not quite as connected as they want to be. So let's talk about getting started, at least to some extent. How do you see, organizations can add these sensors to PDUs or rack controllers? What does the setup or configuration look like? And is it a massive undertaking?
No, it's really pretty simple, and I think we are seeing a little bit of resurgence of people in what they're doing and being proactive. I hate to say it, years ago, it a lot of times revolved around, well, we had a problem, and nobody wants to really talk about it. It was horrible, but now we want to start doing some monitoring. And I think you do still see some of that, but the devices themselves are easy to set up. Many of the sensors use standard RJ45 cables, which everybody has boxes of those sitting around. It's just what sensors and where do you want to see value? There are places where obviously you've got a lot of options for, say, temperature and humidity, right? I mean, there may be numerous places within your facility and multiple tools, but are you getting the right information to the right people from the right places, right? That's the kind of stuff you want to look at. But the system itself, like I said, other than maybe setting some thresholds and things, is really powering the device, and the sensors are pretty much plug and play. You can daisy chain multiple sensors together. So within a chain, you can get temperature and humidity and airflow or air quality or particle or whatever you want. You can mix and match those. Obviously, there's some sensors that you may want to follow the ASHRAE standard, and then there's some sensors you just may want to dot around the facility, right, and just be taking checks just in certain places, knowing that they're going to give you the advanced information that you need to mitigate or solve a problem before it gets critical or there's a downtime loss.
Very cool. And I do encourage everybody to take a look at this stuff deeper or more deeply, right? Whether you're working with things like edge computing or, modular data centers or core primary environments, lighting up intelligence does not have to be a massive, massive undertaking. Calvin, and unfortunately, this looks like that's all the time that we've got. If we didn't get to your question, I do apologize, but we'll make sure we mark those and get a chance to talk about those offline. Thank you so much for everyone joining us. And Calvin, thank you for this wonderful, wonderful conversation. Jen, let me pass it back to you to wrap it up for us.
Yeah, thank you, Bill.
Great. Yeah, thank you both. Bill, as you mentioned, it looks like we are just about out of time, but we'd like to thank Raritan again for sponsoring today's event, as well as Bill and Calvin for that great discussion. Just a reminder to the audience, the seminar will be available on demand starting tomorrow, so please feel free to come back and review. Have a great day, and thank you for attending.